thank you everyone for joining us on this College Planning Essentials presentation. With us today, we have Chris Adrian, who is the Vice President and serves as the 529 Specialist for JP Morgan Asset Management. In her role, Chris travels throughout the country to educate clients and advisors on college planning and the advisor-guided 529 plan using College Planning Essentials. This presentation is going to be presented by Chris and JP Morgan and is brought to you on behalf of Oak and Stone members, Rick Klein, Joe Catanzaro, and Seth Diener. So I will hand it over to Chris and let her get moving.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and team. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm so excited to present College Planning Essentials with all of you. Really important conversation. And as I travel throughout the country and meet with clients, what we're finding is that 2/3 of families have never had a college planning discussion before. So huge thanks to Oak and Stone for putting this on and for especially being part of the cutting edge of financial advisors who are having this conversation. So today, I'm actually going to present selected slides from my favorite book, because I help write it. It's the College Planning Essentials, and it's a piece that JP Morgan puts out every year. Typically, it comes out in February with refreshed data. So this is our most recent 2022 edition, and then next February, we'll have a brand new edition. But what I would encourage, if you do like these slides this evening, definitely reach out to your Oak and Stone advisor. They'll have access to it. But additionally, this is really great for what I like to call kitchen chats. And what I do is actually take these selected slides with my own family. You know, many of you may have really little kids and perhaps it won't resonate yet, but when they get older, I cover 3 major things with my kids: the cost of college, financial aid, and why it's so important for them to get great grades so that they hopefully can get great scholarships. And then lastly, 529 plans and how much mom and dad have saved up in the 529 plan for them. And my oldest especially gets really pumped up about it. And actually it helps him focus when he's in class and make sure, especially now that he's in high school, that he's getting great grades. So without further ado, I'm going to start with my favorite slide. So my own 2 529 plan beneficiaries. It's my son, Joe, on the left. Joe is 15. He is a freshman in high school, which freaks me out a little bit because we are one step closer to college. And his little sister, Kate, is 11. She's in 5th grade this year. Both of them actually just got home with their grandma, so hopefully they don't pop in here in a second. But for both of my kids, very, very high hopes. Joe is actually a phenomenal golfer, but like most teenagers, he's decided he wants to quit golf and focus on football now that he's in high school. And for Kate, she is phenomenal at building. She loves Roblox, she loves Minecraft. So for those kiddos that you might have that would be interested in tech, highly recommend something like Roblox that teaches them how to build, and especially for those IT skills that'll be critical. So very high hopes for my own kids that will get great scholarships, very much like all of your kids, I'm sure. So first thing I wanted to cover is the cost of college. And when we cover the cost of college, it's really important to focus on inflation. Now, inflation is a huge topic right now across the country. Unfortunately, inflation is close to 8% right now, which is the highest it's been in decades. But very important to note on this particular slide that tuition inflation has been the fastest growing household expense for the last 4 decades. So at the very bottom, you'll notice that tuition inflation has grown 840%. And just up above it, for example, is medical care that's grown half as fast over that same time horizon. We have some other common household expenses on here just for fun. Coffee, for example, has inflated about 108% over the last 4 decades. And very important to note, again, that tuition inflation is the fastest growing. If you look in the little box in the bottom right, it shows 5.9%. That's the average annual increase for tuition inflation. So what we find is that families who are saving for college have it earmarked in a checking or a savings account, which is great. I'm really glad that they're getting started. But unfortunately, as we all know, checking and savings is earning next to nothing these days. Very important to think about investing for college just to keep up with tuition inflation. So that's the first thing I wanted to cover. And that's why this particular slide, future four-year college costs, looks so daunting. So the way to read this is to find the age of your child across the bottom of the page today. The green bar represents 4 years all in at an in-state public school. The blue bar represents 4 years all in at a private school. So for example, if we shift all the way out to the far right, for a newborn born this year, 18 years from now, there'll be roughly $235,000 for 4 years of in-state public school and over $536,000 for 4 years of private school. And I know there was a gentleman that had a little baby earlier on when we first started. And so I think those bars are for your little guy. I think it was Al's baby. But for my own two kids, I talked about Joe and Kate, I'm looking at roughly $300,000 for both of them to go to in-state public school, and double that, over $600,000 for my own kids to go to private school. I've been in business over 20 years. Those numbers are daunting to me and my household, but it's really important to think about what your number might look like in the future. And while you may not be able to cover 100%, that's okay. But the great news is Oak and Stone, your financial advisors at Oak and Stone, can help you with that goal and then determine how much each month, quarter, or year you might need to invest to achieve that goal. So really important, as daunting as these numbers are, to know what your number might look like in the future. The second segment that I wanted to go into is financial aid. And the good news is those big bars that we just looked at, that's the sticker cost of college. And with financial aid, hopefully some really good scholarship packages for your kids, there's a net cost of college as well. So I just briefly want to go over those financial aid reality numbers. And these are national averages. So at the top, you've got the grant reality in blue. Now just keep in mind that grants are need-based. So they're typically reserved for those families that have a financial need. But for those that are eligible, about 50% of them across the country receive just under $5,000 each year. And it should cover about 9% of an average four-year public school. If we shift down to the bottom, the scholarship reality in green, the good news is anyone is eligible for scholarships. They are merit-based, so it's based on the merit of your student. 56% of families receive scholarships each year. On average, it's just under $7,400. And again, if we look in the little tiny circles off to the right, sorry if it's small on your screen, but it should cover about 12% of an average four-year public school. So big key takeaway is while 12% might be covered by scholarships, how do we help fund the other 88%? And by the way, my favorite stat in this entire deck is in the upper right. It's the 0.3% that's highlighted. That's the average of all college students across the country who actually receive a full ride. So again, not 3%, but 0.3%. And earlier I talked about how my son Joe is a great golfer. Now he's hyper-focused on football. My husband thinks for sure he's going to get a full ride athletically. And so I often point to that 0.3% as the reason why we're investing for Joe instead of just banking on the full ride. But I do really enjoy that stat, especially for those who might have received a full ride on the line. Definitely give yourself a pat on the back because that is extraordinary. And this probability is very, very small.
And Chris, just to confirm, that's
Yeah.
0.3% for athletic scholarships, merit-based scholarships, any type of scholarship that they could possibly give you, all
Correct.
bundled in, is still only 0.3%.
Exactly. Yep. And little side note, by the way, we don't have this stat on the page. We have it elsewhere in our college planning essentials, but only 2% of high school seniors actually receive an athletic scholarship. So only the top 2% of high schoolers actually get athletic scholarships.
And that is that full ride? That's not full ride scholarships. That's any piece of athletic scholarship. Okay.
Correct.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, great question. Thank you, Ryan. So next I wanted to talk about the FAFSA. And I know that this looks a little bit busy on the page, but I actually get more questions about financial aid than any other in the deck. So just briefly wanted to go over the formula with each of you. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. That's what the acronym stands for. And every family across the country is encouraged to apply for FAFSA, even if they think they're not going to be eligible for student aid or for federal aid. And the reason for that is because these numbers that you're adding to the FAFSA actually get sent to the schools where your children are going to be applying. And the school uses these numbers to determine your aid package there. So if you might be eligible for scholarships or grants at the school level, these same numbers are included at the school. So what I wanted to help highlight, though, when you're filling out the FAFSA, what the federal government is trying to solve for is your expected family contribution, or your EFC for short. And it's not necessarily the amount you're going to be expected to pay out of pocket for college, but rather the number that school and the federal government are going to look at to determine what your aid package might be. So what I wanted to focus on, though, is the parents bucket on the left, because the biggest driver of the financial aid formula is parents' income. It's a sliding scale between 22 and 47%. If you're in a lower income tax bracket, you'll be closer to the 22%. If you're in a higher income tax bracket, you'll be closer to the 47%. And it is up above a protected amount, but it's a very low bar for that protected amount. So unfortunately, parents' income is where a lot of families get phased out of federal financial aid. So definitely wanted to highlight that. And then parent assets is only up to 5.64%. So whether you have a checking or a savings account or any non-qualified investment account or a 529 college savings vehicle, that's all going to count the same. And that's up to 5.64%. So really small percentage of the total financial aid package, or total financial aid formula rather, is a parent asset. So if we look at the right-hand side, I just briefly wanted to cover the students bucket. Students' income is 50% of the formula. It is protected up over $7,000 if you look in the little fine print there. So the good news is if your student makes less than $7,000, you don't have to count that. If they make up over 7, anything above and beyond that is 50% of the formula. And then student assets are 20% of the formula. So if you have any custodial accounts, those are typically called UGMAs or UPMAs, or if you have any student CDs, bank accounts, checking or savings accounts, for example, those are all going to be 20% of the FAFSA formula. And at the very bottom, you probably notice a box that says 0%. A lot of people get pretty excited about that. That's the good news. So if grandma or grandpa or anyone else want to open a 529 on behalf of your student, it is 0% of the financial aid formula. And it used to be that you would want to wait until the junior or senior year of college to start using that money, because unfortunately, anytime you took money out of those accounts, you had to count it 2 years later on the FAFSA. That's completely gone away. There was a big change during COVID called FAFSA simplification, and grandma and grandpa and anyone else who has a 529 account for you no longer has to worry about that. So if you have money in that 529, you don't have to count it on the FAFSA when you apply, and you don't have to count it when you pull money out either. So especially for those advisors on the line, that was a big change during COVID, and a lot of grandparents are very, very excited about that. So next I wanted to cover the solution, and that's the 529 plan. Back in 1996, the federal government created 529 plans as the premier way to invest for college. And I really wanted to highlight just the 3 major benefits listed at the top. I know this is a pretty busy slide, but I'll break it down. So at the top, you've got great tax advantages. I think of a 529 plan very much like a Roth IRA. It's always after-tax dollars that get invested. It grows tax deferred. And as long as the money is used for a qualified educational expense, which by the way are listed off to the far right of the slide, all of that money comes out tax-free. So amazing tax advantages where the earnings all come out tax-free. And then in certain states, depending on where you might live, there are certain state tax deductions as well. So the year that you make a contribution into the 529 plan, depending on which state you live in, you might be eligible for an attractive state tax deduction as well. And if you're not sure, fortunately, your Oakenstone advisor can help you with that to determine what deduction you might be eligible for. So the second major benefit that I wanted to cover is the estate planning benefit. And there's something very, very special within a 529 plan. It only exists within 529s. It's called the accelerated gift. And it's where you can take this year's annual gift limit, which is $16,000 per child, and you can accelerate that and multiply it by 5. So for an individual tax filer, you can gift up to $80,000 as one big lump sum. And if you're married filing jointly, you can gift up to $160,000 per child or grandchild as one big lump sum. The great news is that completely removes it from your estate. So all those earnings grow tax-free outside of your estate. It's the only gift that you can make, completed gift that you can make, where you still maintain control as well. So that brings me to the third major benefit that I wanted to cover, and that's the control and the flexibility of 529s. 529 usually has one account owner and one beneficiary. And the great news is the account owner maintains full control over the account, even when the child reaches the age of majority. So very different than a custodial account. Custodial accounts, again, are UGMAs or UPMAs. With those, the child can actually take over when they reach the age of majority. Within a 529, the account owner can still maintain control until they would like to give it over to the beneficiary. So that's an interesting difference. The other part about the flexibility, within a 529 plan, if you have a leftover balance, you can actually shift that leftover balance tax-free to any family member up to first cousin. So earlier I had talked about my son Joe, my daughter Kate. If Joe does get a full ride playing football, hopefully, I can take his leftover balance and I can actually shift it to his baby sister Kate, and that would be a tax-free event. I can actually do that up to first cousin. So for my nieces and nephews, I could do a tax-free change to them as well. So that's some flexibility. The other flexibility component is that it doesn't have to be used just for a college or a university. The good news is you can now use them for vocational schools. You can also use them for apprenticeships. So if you are worried that maybe your child wouldn't go to college or university and you have some 529 money, they're very, very flexible. So that actually brings me to the right-hand side of the page, and I'll talk about those flexible changes. Qualified education expenses, in case you were wondering what you might be able to use a 529 for, covers everything from tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, special needs services. So if your child might need a special needs tutor, that's that particular category. And then lastly, computers and related equipment. So laptops, printers, ink, all of that is incorporated with computers and related equipment. And then some brand new additions that the federal government just made, educational loan payments. So if you have any older student loans that you still need to pay off, it's up to $10,000 over the life of the 529. There's also K through 12 tuition. So if your child might be going to private K through 12, you can now use a 529 up to 10 grand per kid per year. And then lastly, apprenticeship programs. So if your child might become an apprentice, as long as the apprenticeship program is registered with the DOL, which is the Department of Labor, you can now use a 529 for apprenticeships as well. So the good news is 529s continue to become more flexible, and hopefully you'll have enough invested where you don't have to take out student loans as well. So the last page, let me skip forward a little bit. The last page that I wanted to
Real
cover.
quick.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask
Go
you a
ahead, Seth.
question?
Sure.
So at what age is the limit that you have to like get the money out? Is it 35?
It's not. So 529s are very different, whereby they can be held to perpetuity. There is no age at which you have to take the money out. It used to be that if you had what was called an educational savings account, or ESAs, that was the predecessor to 529s, you had to pull that money out by 30. But with 529s, you can actually hold them. Some families use them as legacy plans, where they just continue to pass them down to future generations.
Yeah.
So if both of my kids get a full ride, hopefully, I can use their balance and even save it for my grandkids down the road. And there's some gift tax that might be associated with that, because it's going to become a new gift because I'm going down a generation. But the good news is you can hold them to perpetuity. There is no age at which you have to take the money out.
Well, if they got a scholarship, you would pull it out and put it in a bank account, right?
Yes, you can do that too. So if your child does receive a scholarship, you can pull the money out. It doesn't have that 10% penalty associated with it if you pull it out for a non-qualified reason. And that's considered an exception to pulling the money out. So great question, Seth. Thank you for that. And by the way, if any of you have questions, Ryan or Rick, if you'd like to jump in, feel free. I'd love to make it interactive. So actually, let me cover this very quickly, because I know a few of you have smaller kids, and I wanted to highlight the benefits of compounding. What I love about this slide is it really helps highlight when you start early, even small contributions add up. So the blue bar represents $100 investment each month. The green bar represents $250 investment each month. And the purple bar represents a $500 investment each month. And this chart assumes a 6% rate of return over the time horizon. But at the far left, if you start when the child is a newborn and you're investing each of those dollar amounts, the great news is if you look at the purple bar for a second and you're investing $500 a month over 18 years, it will be roughly $191,000 18 years from now. Kind of a magic number, because it will cover nearly 100% of 4 years of in-state public school. So while those big bars were really daunting that we looked at before, if you start early and you have time and compounding on your side, really can make a huge difference. And then in the middle bars, that's if you start at age 6. And the far left is if you start when the child is age 12. So it really shows you that power of compounding, and especially that cost of waiting. If you haven't started investing and you have kiddos that are older like mine, don't worry. It's never too late to start. And for me, I didn't start with the 529 team until Joe was 7. So I had a lot of catch up to do, and it can definitely be done. So I actually drove an old Honda Accord for 14 years. And that monthly payment that I wasn't making towards a new car went completely in Joe's 529. So, it's just one trade-off that our family made. And I'm sure a number of you probably have similar stories where you can carve that money out. And as long as you start early and have time on your side, it can make a huge difference.
And just for math people.
Yeah, let me bounce back there.
Yeah, that's, $500 a month, every month for 6 years, $6,000 a year for 6 years, $36,000 with an $86,000 difference in those purple bars. Just wanted to reiterate that point for you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Yep, so that cost of waiting definitely adds up, unfortunately, but never too late to start. Definitely wanted to encourage you, if you have older kids, get started if you can. So last, I wanted to cover this slide here, and this slide actually covers a number of really helpful financial aid and college planning websites that we've compiled from across the country. What I really wanted to focus on, though, on the right-hand side under the purple, is the grants and scholarship websites. So for those of you that might have older kids that are approaching college age, definitely wanted to encourage you to go out and have your child apply for as many grants and scholarships as they can. The good news is, especially if you look at the first website, goingnary.com, for example, seems to be really popular right now with high school seniors. But the good news is you can create an online profile for your child using the username and password, and it will actually go out and source matching grants and scholarships for your child, and then they can simply go online and apply. The other cool thing is it's completely digitized. So if there are common essay questions that your child is seeing over and over again, I recommend creating a Word document of those common essay questions and their answers, and then they can simply cut and paste those answers into the application. So it's a great time savings and completely digitized. Remember when I was 18, I had to handwrite all of my essays. My mom made me do one every night when I turned 18, and I really despised it. But now it's even easier. You can just do it completely online. And there's a number of grants and scholarships that go unused across the country every year, which is why I definitely encourage you to do that. And it's also a great way to chip away from those costs of college, just help offset those huge costs of college. So with that, I know I just did a lot of talking for the last half hour. Sorry, Ryan. I covered the costs of college, I covered financial aid, and then lastly, we talked about 529 plans and some grant and scholarship websites that hopefully will help as your kids get older. But I think I'll pause there, Ryan, and see if there are any questions that I can help address on the line.
And if you have a question, you can either unmute or put it in the chat box, and we can get it over to Chris. And if we can't answer your questions today, reach out to your advisor and we will make sure that we get an answer to you as soon as possible.
And for those that might be shy and want to ask the question offline, we can definitely do that too. Oh yeah, go ahead, Seth.
Can you dive in a little bit on like who I can transfer a 529 plan to, like, you know, which way I can go? You said, I think second cousin, first cousin?
First cousin, yep. So it always follows the family line of the original beneficiary. So one thing to point out is some people will open a 529 account for their neighbor's child, which is amazing, very, very generous.
Wow.
But if the neighbor's child doesn't need it, it's going to follow their family line. So the neighbor's child's family line is who that should follow to keep it a non-taxable event. But it is up to first cousin. So for Joe and Kate, my kids, for example, I can transfer it to my niece and my nephew, and that would be a non-taxable event. I can also stay within the family and I can move it back to myself. So if, for example, I go back to get my MBA or some advanced degree and there's a leftover balance, I could name myself as a beneficiary. We have some grandparents who have leftover balances and they decide they want to go to culinary school. So one grandma called in a couple weeks ago, moved the beneficiary to herself, and the culinary school was considered accredited, qualified. So she used it for her own culinary. She was so excited too. It was adorable.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So then, you know, what about, can you transfer, like if I transfer to my first cousin, then they can transfer to their first cousin and then they can transfer to their first cousin and keep going like that?
Yeah. Yeah. So it just continues to follow that same family line.
Wow.
Yeah. And you can go down generations. So earlier, Seth, you and I had talked about how these can be held forever to perpetuity. So you can continue to pass it down the family line that way too.
Nice. I'm going to start making my way towards Warren Buffett right now.
I think you'd have to marry into his family, and
I'm going to get there with my 529.
And Chris, just to confirm, if you were to say open up one for your neighbor and they didn't go to college or something like that, you could still get that money back. There would just be tax consequences or penalties, right? It's not gone forever.
That's right. Yeah. So Ryan, great point. And something we didn't cover is how when you pull money out for any non-qualified reason, let's say you needed it for a medical expense or for some other emergency, It's a 10% penalty, but just on the earnings component of the 529, because your principal is always after tax. So just on the earnings is a 10% penalty. And then there's also taxes at both the federal and the state level. But again, just on that earnings component of the 529. So if you were to move in your scenario, Ryan, the neighbor's kid didn't need it, you wanted to cash it out, 10% penalty plus taxes on their earnings.
And when you're taking money out, do earnings come out first? Is it a pro rata slice or?
It's pro rata. So there's always going to be principal and earnings connected together. So no matter how much you pull out, there are always going to be earnings associated, assuming that you have positive earnings, of course, hopefully. Yeah, so it's pro rata. Great question.
Awesome. All right, well, no other questions?
Oh, I have one quick one. I know it's very much in flux, but I'm wondering if you have any information on the student loan forgiveness?
I do, yeah. So at this point, I'll keep it factual because that's all we have at this point. And it can always change. It's very fluid. But from what was announced a few weeks ago, President Biden announced the student loan forgiveness plan for families that have up to $125,000 in income. If they're an individual filer, it's $125,000. If you're a married household or just a household, it's $250,000 of adjusted gross income. But if you are under those thresholds and you have student loan debt, up to $10,000 of that student loan will be forgiven. And if you are under another threshold, if you have an even smaller household income, it's usually about $60,000, and you collected Pell Grants while you were in college, up to $20,000 of your student loans will be forgiven. So it's those two different categories, depending on where the student was, and then also based on your household income. At this point, the federal government hasn't come out with a form yet. They're developing a form on their Department of Education's website where people can go and apply. They're anticipating that'll be available in about 30 days, where people would be able to go out and apply for it and would be able to see more on whether or not they would be eligible. But again, hasn't been developed yet and might be challenged, but in general, those are the facts that we have so far, Lauren. So hopefully that wasn't too much.
Mirror Lake lunches and whatnot from OSU.
Yes. Great question. Thank you, Lauren. And Ryan,
I have another question here. So between other investment options like Roth, is the 529, in your opinion, the single best option for college savings? Or is there a hybrid approach that you think would be a little bit better?
That's a great question. I think that one is actually the best question for your Open Stone financial advisor. Caveat that. The reason why I say that is because it just depends on the household. It also depends on your income situation, because some families aren't eligible for Roth IRAs, perhaps their children. You can open one for the benefit of your child if they have income. That may be a good strategy, but I think it just depends on your own family's situation. I do know that some families consider a Roth IRA because they like that flexibility. If their child doesn't go to college, that it can be used for their future retirement. It does matter though when you fill out the FAFSA. So I definitely want to talk about that really quickly, and not to get into the weeds, but just really quickly. We think about a 529 plan. Again, it becomes a parent asset when it's owned by the parent, and that's up to 5.64%. So again, really small percentage. If you have a Roth IRA and you pull money out of the Roth IRA to pay for your child's college, it counts as student income at the 50% level 2 years later. So some families think about using that Roth IRA in the junior or senior year of college for their student, and then they don't have to worry about reporting that on the FAFSA. But that's just one small nuance as it applies to financial aid. For those families that are worried about the impact on financial aid, that's one strategy that they could use. And again, that's waiting to use that Roth IRA money until the junior or senior year of college is some strategies that I've seen. So again, it just depends on the family situation, and your financial advisors can definitely help more on that.
Awesome. All right, well, I want to thank you, Chris, for putting on this great presentation for us. And like we said before, if you guys have more questions, feel free to reach out to your advisor. But once again, thanks, Chris.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for hosting. Thanks so much, guys. So
Thank
glad
you.
I could do this, by the way. It's my favorite topic.